Hi, and welcome to Horror Recapped. In today's video, we will explain the 2014 horror film titled Babadook. This Australian movie follows the story of a single mother and her son who is deathly afraid of monsters. His fears come to life as they notice a sinister presence lurking in the shadows of their home. Watch out, spoilers ahead. Enjoy. We begin the film with images of a woman being violently tossed around inside what appears to be a vehicle. She looks over to a male in the seat next to her, seconds before what we can imagine to be a crash. Suddenly, the woman, Amelia, awakens from her dream. She has been pulled out of her nightmare by her son, Samuel. He swears that he too had a bad dream, and Amelia goes to his room to check all of the hiding spots for monsters and read him a new bedtime story. After Samuel falls asleep, he keeps his mother awake by grabbing her neck and grinding his teeth, but Amelia pulls him off her and slides over to the edge of the bed. In the morning, her alarm clock wakes her, but Samuel is already awake and up to mischief. As Amelia hears crashing downstairs, she comes downstairs to find Samuel using his new invention for stopping monsters. As she fixes up his magician costume, Samuel gives Amelia legitimate attention and Amelia takes Samuel to school. She ends up going straight to work afterwards, and we find out that she works as a dietary aide for senior citizens. Later on, she is called to Samuel's school for a disciplinary meeting about him shooting a homemade crossbow in class. After she finds out that the school wants to pull him aside and monitor him on his own, Amelia decides that it might be time to take Samuel to a different school. On the ride home, the two of them talk about how they might handle everything that happened, and the two of them head to the grocery store. Once there, Samuel spills the beans on what happened to his father. It turns out that Amelia's husband died in a car crash while driving Amelia to the hospital to have Samuel. After meeting her sister, Claire, we see that the rift between the two is bigger than it's ever been. But in the background, Samuel is climbing higher and higher on the playground. When she notices Samuel standing at the top of the playground, she takes him home, and Samuel screams the entire ride. Once inside, Amelia notices her dog sniffing at the basement door, but she thinks nothing of it. After a rather peaceful evening, the two of them go through their nightly routine and Samuel picks a book for story time. It's called Mr. Babadook. As Amelia reads the book, they realize how dark the story becomes, and it sends Samuel into a tizzy. Amelia ends up reading a nicer book for story time, and after he falls asleep, Amelia takes the Babadook story and reads it silently in her room. When she's done, she hides the book above her armoire and goes down to watch TV. After a lonely night of eating sweets and watching TV, she heads to her bedroom and grabs her electric cucumber to enjoy the rest of her night. As Amelia begins to finish her masterpiece, Samuel jumps onto her bed and interrupts her, while talking about how the Babadook is in his closet. After Samuel falls asleep in her bed, she stays up to read a little bit. But when she hears banging outside her room, she turns off the light and falls asleep with Samuel. In the blink of an eye, Samuel wakes her up at 9 and she realizes that she's late for the day. Before she takes him to Claire's house, she makes him understand that he can't talk about monsters or the Babadook. After an exhilarating day at work playing bingo, she ends up talking to her coworker, Robbie, and he talks her into leaving work early to get some rest. Amelia agrees, but when she notices that she's missed a bunch of calls from her sister, she rushes over to see what's wrong. Claire explains that Samuel scared everyone with his talk of Babadook, and Amelia takes him home. After he tells her that the Babadook wants to scare her first, Amelia decides that she's not going to be letting him have a birthday party that week. When her friend Robbie comes over, she explains why she's so tired, and Samuel blames her for not having a dad anymore. That night, Samuel's behavior starts to wear on Amelia even more than usual. Samuel has this idea that he is the only one that can be there to save her from the Babadook, and he takes up his post in front of the closet. When he confronts the Babadook, a scream is heard, and Amelia runs upstairs. When she gets to his room, she finds the closet is turned over, and Samuel is fear-stricken under his bed. After Samuel warns her repeatedly not to let it in, she takes the storybook and rips up the pages before she throws it away in the trash. After they both lie down, Amelia hears more banging outside her bedroom door, and she simply falls asleep. The next morning, the two of them head to Samuel's cousin's birthday party, and Amelia is forced to socially interact with Claire's friends who see her as a disadvantaged woman. After hearing about some of their problems, Amelia can't take it, and she talks about how hard it must be to have their problems. Afterwards, Claire tells Amelia that she can't stand to come over to her home because she can't stand to be around her son. Amelia is stunned by what she just heard that came from the mouth of her own sister. At the same time, Samuel is having an argument in the treehouse with his cousin about how he isn't good enough to have a dad that didn't want to die and how his own mother doesn't even want him. Well, he had enough of that talk, because next thing you know, he's pushed his cousin out of the treehouse and she hits the ground with a solid thud. When they drive home, Amelia can't take the screaming and kicking, and the two of them end up screaming at each other over and over until Samuel screams at an imaginary figure in the back seat with him. Samuel screams so intensely that he begins to seize. After a checkup at the doctor, he tells Amelia that he can refer them to a psychiatrist, and he can give her a mild sedative that will help Samuel sleep. That night, Samuel and Amelia have one of the most peaceful sleeps ever, but in the morning, Amelia keeps answering the door to banging outside. The final time, she finds the book she threw away, but now the pages are all pieced together again. When Amelia turns to her sister for help, she gets brushed off and told to go to the police. When the phone rings again, Amelia answers it, but all she hears is the Babadook. When she goes to the police, they tell her that they can't do anything without some sort of evidence, and she's already just burnt the book that could be used as evidence. That afternoon, Amelia follows a trail in her house that leads her to behind the refrigerator. After she pulls it away from the wall, she discovers a hole in the wall that is just crawling with bugs. That afternoon, two people show up to talk to her about Samuel's enrollment in school. As they come inside, they begin to question Samuel and investigate the house. When Amelia speaks with them, she starts to tell them about the hole in the wall, but when they pass the refrigerator, the hole is gone. That night, Amelia spots the Babadook in the neighbor's house, but she brushes it off and spends time with Samuel. Later, Amelia reads Samuel his bedtime story. Then she lies down with him. She hears something dragging on the floor outside the door, but when she starts to worry, she hears the bark of their dog. She lets the dog into the room and lies back down, but just a few seconds later, the same scraping sound comes from the hall and the door opens. As she looks at the door, she sees a figure reach inside the room, and Babadook calls his name 3 times. When she looks again, he's on the ceiling, and he ends up coming for her. Amelia grabs Samuel and rushes him downstairs, where she turns on all of the lights. The two of them watch old black and white films to try to stay up, but Babadook infiltrates her dreams in the TV movie. Come morning time, Samuel comes into Amelia's room as she goes to lie down, but she can't help but lash out at him. Afterwards, Amelia feels bad and she goes to apologize to Samuel. She tries to make it up to Samuel by taking him to his favorite restaurant, but Samuel still doesn't trust her. Later on, the two of them get into a little fender bender, and it becomes clear that Amelia is losing her mind. Later, when Amelia goes to give Samuel his tranquilizer medicine, he fakes taking it. After making sure that he takes his medicine, Amelia goes downstairs to watch TV, but she starts to hallucinate that Samuel is dead. Samuel even calls out to her because she is holding a knife while standing over him. When she removes herself, even the dog doesn't trust her, and it runs away. Amelia tries to bring Samuel ice cream to make up for almost killing him, but she starts to hallucinate more when he falls asleep. She winds up following a vision of Samuel into the basement, and she comes across the ghost of her late husband. After she embraces him, the ghost tells her that they can be together if she brings him Samuel. This causes her to go back up in disbelief, and she begins to see him for what he really is. Eventually, Amelia runs back upstairs where the electricity is on the fritz. As she looks around, she finds the figure of the Babadook has made its way inside. When she goes upstairs, she barricades herself in the bedroom, but it's too late. Babadook creeps into the room with her, and he forces himself inside her. Amelia ends up waking up in her chair in the living room, and we see that Samuel is already hiding upstairs by now. As the dog barks at Amelia, she turns her attention to the dog and chases it into the kitchen, where she kills it and leaves its limp body. Amelia then reaches into her own mouth and pulls out one of her teeth. When she gathers her wits again, she makes her way after Samuel into his room. Samuel has locked the door, but Amelia tries to play with Samuel's emotions to get him to open the door. After she breaks in like a barbarian, she lets out a horrific screech as she floats across the floor to where Samuel stands, terrified. Samuel tries to distract her with fireworks, but he knows that it's not really his mother. He grabs all of his defense inventions, and he even shoots her with a dart from his crossbow. Soon, there's a knock at the door, and Samuel takes this chance to try and leave. He comes across the dead dog in the kitchen, and he tries to keep running. Meanwhile, Amelia answers the door, and it ends up being the next-door neighbor, who is trying to make her understand that she can always come to her if she needs. Eventually, Amelia and Samuel come face to face again, and Amelia tries to act like herself. She even tells him that they can stay at the neighbor's house that night. But Samuel doesn't believe her. He ends up stabbing her in the leg, and he runs down into the basement. As Amelia gives chase, Samuel knocks her out and ties her down in the basement. When she comes to, Amelia struggles, but Samuel reassures her that he will always love her and protect her. Amelia ends up getting loose, but as she chokes Samuel, he caresses her face. It becomes clear that Amelia is fighting the Babadook, and she eventually rolls over onto all fours and expels the essence. As the two of them make their way back into the house, something takes Samuel upstairs from Amelia, and it becomes clear that the Babadook is still trying to get Samuel from her. Eventually, Amelia cries out asking what he wants, and the Babadook appears as her dead husband again. Amelia watches him die in front of her yet again. Then the Babadook really appears this time. Amelia is ready to stand up to him this time though, and Samuel comes up and supports her as well. Amelia stands her ground against all the odds, and she ends up driving the Babadook away. Amelia goes to investigate that he's really gone, but Samuel begs her not to bother it. Suddenly, it gets up and flees into the door under the stairs. Amelia and Samuel embrace each other as they finally recognize that the danger is over. Later on, the two of them end up going back to a normal life, and they have never looked happier. Amelia has seemingly embraced all of Samuel's weird quirks, and they gather worms outside in a bowl. Amelia ends up taking the bowl of worms down into the basement, where she leaves it for the Babadook. He ends up showing himself to Amelia, but she is no longer a match for him, and she has already proven to be in control of her home. She returns to Samuel, and the two of them spend a lovely time on his birthday. That's the end of this film. We hope you've enjoyed watching this recap. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can watch any of our other horror film recaps. Thanks for watching.